He didn't even have the decency to look ashamed. That was the part Lena Marlowe kept coming back to even hours later, even standing in the rain-soaked hallway with her hand pressed flat against the wall to keep herself upright. Dante Moretti, the man who made grown men weep with a single phone call, the man whose name alone could empty a room, was sitting on the edge of their bed with Vivian Cross beside him. And he looked at Lena the way a man looks at an inconvenient problem he has not yet decided how to solve. Not guilt, not horror. Calculation, 8 months pregnant. Her back had been aching since Tuesday. She had driven 40 minutes in a storm because she forgot her prenatal vitamins on the nightstand. And there they were. Lena didn't scream. She didn't throw anything. She walked to the dresser, pulled off her wedding ring with fingers that barely trembled, set it on the mahogany surface with a sound so small it should have meant nothing, and looked her husband in the eye. I hope she was worth it. Then she walked out, and Dante Moretti, feared by every criminal organization on the eastern seaboard, sat silent and let her go. Because some part of him believed she would come back. She always came back. She was Lena. She loved him. He was wrong about a lot of things that year. That was simply the first one. If you've ever been betrayed by the person you trusted most, if you've ever stood in a doorway and felt the entire architecture of your life collapse without making a single sound, then stay with me. Because this story is for you. And I promise it gets worse before it gets better. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, hit that like button, and drop a comment telling me what city or country you're watching from. I want to see how far this story has traveled. Now, let's go back to the beginning. Before the ring hit the dresser, before the rain, before Dante Moretti lost absolutely everything he had spent his life building. The night Lena first met Dante, she was not supposed to be there. She had been covering a shift for her roommate at the Carmine Hotel bar, 3 hours of serving overpriced whiskey to men in suits who overtipped to compensate for something. And Dante had walked in with 4 people around him. The way a storm front walks in with its own weather. He didn't announce himself. He didn't need to. The bartender's posture changed. The hostess near the entrance found something urgent to look at in the opposite direction. And Lena, who had been raised practical and unsentimental by a single mother in South Philadelphia, who survived on Irish stubbornness and black coffee, took one look at the controlled quiet he brought into the room and thought, that man is exhausted. She hadn't been wrong. She had also, in the long accounting of her life, never been more expensively right about anything. Dante Moretti was 34 years old that night, 18 months out from burying his father Marco Moretti, who had built the Moretti family's operations across New York's 5 boroughs across 3 violent decades. And he was wearing that inheritance the way you wear a coat that doesn't quite fit, heavy on the shoulders, constraining across the chest. He ordered scotch neat, and when Lena asked him if he wanted anything else, he said, without looking up from his phone, a conversation that isn't about money or loyalty. She said, I get off at 11. He looked up then. They talked until 2 in the morning, at a corner table after the bar cleared, and Lena told him exactly 2 lies that night. One was about how long she'd been bartending. The other was about whether she'd recognized his name. She had. Everyone in New York with a functioning set of ears recognized the Moretti name. But she'd grown up around a neighborhood where half the fathers worked in ways that weren't discussed openly at kitchen tables, and she had developed early an ability to separate the person from the reputation, or at least to give the person the first conversation before the reputation closed in. Dante didn't talk about business that night. He talked about his mother's garden in Westchester, which she'd maintained with a ferocious personal commitment, even as everything else in the family had been consumed by violence and secrecy. He talked about a dog he'd had at 12 that he still missed in a way that clearly embarrassed him. He talked about a book he'd been trying to finish for 8 months and kept losing track of because every time he sat down to read, his phone rang. Lena listened. She had the quality, rare and expensive, of listening as if what you were saying actually mattered. It wasn't performance. It was simply how she was built. Her mother had called it a liability. Lena had spent 31 years deciding whether she agreed. By the time the hotel staff had started mopping around their table in pointed suggestions that the evening was over, Dante had stopped feeling like the most powerful man in the room. He had simply felt like a person who had spent a very long time being profoundly alone. That was what she did to him, what she had always done. He called her the next day, and the day after that. 6 months later, he asked her to move into the Blackthorn estate. With him, a manor house in Westchester that the Moretti family had owned since the 70s, whose rooms were large enough to echo and whose windows faced a garden his mother had stopped tending 2 years before she died. Lita had stood in the middle of the main hallway with her one suitcase and her sensible shoes and looked at the oil portraits on the walls and the staircase that curved like a question mark and said, carefully, Dante, I'm not a woman you can put in a house and then not look at. He had said, I know. He had meant it. For a while, he had genuinely meant it. The proposal came 8 months later, in the kitchen at 5 in the morning because Dante couldn't sleep, and Lena had come downstairs to find him at the table with his coffee gone cold and his jaw tight with whatever calculations ran through his mind at hours when the house was dark and the machinery of his empire ground on without pause. He didn't get down on one knee. He slid a ring across the table oval diamond, platinum band, chosen without a jeweler's advice, because he'd had a specific image in his mind and said, I don't know how to be a normal husband. I need you to know that up front. She'd looked at the ring. Then at him, I don't need normal, I need honest. I can do honest. He had believed that too. The problem with Dante Moretti was not that he was a liar by nature. The problem was that he told himself stories about who he was that became, over time, indistinguishable from truth. He had told himself he was the kind of man who, when he loved someone, loved them completely and without reservation. He had told himself that the empire and the marriage could coexist, that Lena was strong enough to hold her shape inside his world, that the secrecy and the isolation, and the nights he came home with blood on his shoes and couldn't tell her why, that those were the price of the life, and she had agreed to pay it. What he hadn't considered was that there is a difference between a woman who agrees to pay a price and a woman who is capable of infinite payment. Every transaction has an end. The first 3 years of the marriage were not happy in the conventional sense, but they were real, which Lena had always valued above happiness. Dante's world was violent and secretive and morally unambiguous in its corruption, and Lena was not naive. She had looked at what he was and chosen him anyway, carrying that knowledge like ballast, heavy and necessary, keeping her from floating off into comfortable delusion. She kept her own work. She had a graduate degree in nonprofit administration that she'd finished before she met him, and she ran a small arts organization in the Bronx that served kids from the neighborhoods where Moretti money had historically flowed. She was aware of the irony. She had made her own private accounting of it and decided she could live with it. What she could not live with, she had believed then, was irrelevance. Being the woman in the house, the beautiful problem that had been put somewhere quiet. And for 3 years she hadn't been that. Dante had included her. Not in the business, never in the business. That was one of his absolute lines, but in his actual life, the interior life that so few people knew he had. He called her from hotel rooms in cities he wasn't supposed to tell her he was in. He argued with her about things that mattered and things that didn't with equal energy. He fell asleep with his hand on her waist and woke up tense with whatever the day required, and she had become, in some molecular way she couldn't fully articulate, the thing he oriented toward, the fix point. Then his operation expanded. The Moretti family absorbed 3 smaller crews across the eastern seaboard following a series of events that Dante never detailed and Lena never asked about. The organization doubled in complexity, and Dante disappeared into it. Not physically, he was still in the house, still at the table, still occasionally present. But the interior access closed down, the way a city closes its street-level windows before a storm, shuttering everything that had been left open to light and air. He stopped arguing with her. He stopped telling her things. The calls from hotel rooms stopped. The hand on her waist at night was there, sometimes and sometimes wasn't, and she began to understand that she could stop waiting to hear which version she'd gotten. She told herself it was temporary. Organizations went through expansion phases. The pressure would ease, he would come back. She stayed. She adapted. She made herself smaller in ways she didn't fully notice until much later, when she would look back at those 18 months and see the gradual self-compression of a woman who was trying to take up less oxygen so someone else would have enough to breathe. Vivian Cross came into the picture the way a lot of disasters come plausibly, through legitimate channels, with a face that gave nothing away. She was a financial consultant, brought in during the expansion to help restructure the front-facing businesses that ran clean money through legitimate operations. Impeccably credentialed, calm the way expensive things tend to be calm. She had dark eyes that tracked everything and a way of listening in meetings that made men feel understood without her having said a word, which was a skill Lena recognized and which should have told her something in retrospect about where Vivian had learned it. Dante had introduced them at a dinner at the estate, one of the formal ones, 8 people around the long table, conversations carefully navigated around what could and couldn't be said, and Vivian had looked at Lena with complete pleasantness and said she'd heard so much about her, and Lena had looked back and felt a small cold thing move through her that she immediately herself was hormones or stress or the wine she'd switched to water 3 weeks ago because she'd gotten a positive test the previous Tuesday. She hadn't told Dante about the pregnancy yet. She'd been waiting for the right moment, for a version of him that felt accessible, for a night when he came home before midnight and didn't look through her on his way to the study. The right moment kept not arriving. Vivian began showing up at the estate for working dinners, then for weekends when business required sustained access to documentation. The library was set up as a second office during these visits. Lena's house, her library, her books on the upper shelves, Vivian Cross's files spreading across the reading table like an occupation. Dante framed it as temporary and necessary. Lena nodded. She was good at nodding by then. She started noticing small things. A quality of stillness in Dante when Vivian entered a room. The specific way he didn't look at her, the careful management of his gaze that looked like indifference but was shaped wrong, had an awareness at the edges that indifference doesn't have. The fact that his phone went with him to every room now, face down on whatever surface was near, charger always handy. She noticed, she said nothing, she was not ready to know. The baby was growing. She told herself she would tell him soon. The night she found them, she had driven back early from the Bronx because the event she'd been planning had been canceled due to a burst pipe at the venue, and her lower back had been aching since morning in a dull, specific way that made her want her own bed and her own pillow and the warmth of the house. She hadn't called ahead. It hadn't occurred to her that she needed to call ahead to come home. The house was quiet in a particular way, lights on in the bedroom wing. The kind of quiet that happens when people inside a space believe no one else is approaching. She took the stairs slowly because her back was worse on the stairs, and she pushed open the door to their room because the door was half open, not latched, the way it always was when the room was empty or when Dante was simply in from the bathroom. They were sitting on the bed. Vivian's shoes were off. Dante had his jacket over the chair in the corner, the specific chair he always put his jacket on, the familiarity of that, the domestic intimacy of that chair in the corner with his jacket on it. And Vivian's hand was on his forearm, and he was looking at her the way Lena had not been looked at in so long she had almost forgotten that look existed. Like she mattered. Like she was the fixed point. Lena stood in the doorway. She did not know how long she stood there. Long enough for both of them to become aware of her. Long enough for Vivian to go very still. Long enough for Dante to look up and meet her eyes, and for her to see not guilt, not the crumbling horror of a man caught, but the calculation. The quick, cold assessment of someone determining the magnitude of the problem and beginning already to construct the containment. Something happened to Lena in that moment that she would spend a long time afterward trying to name. It wasn't rage. Rage was loud and demanded something in return. It wasn't grief, exactly. Though there was grief underneath, enormous and tidal. It was more like the cessation of a sound she hadn't known, was constant until it stopped. A signal going quiet. A frequency that had been running through her body for 3 years suddenly shutting off. She walked to the dresser. She removed her wedding ring. She set it down with both hands steady. I hope she was worth it. The room held its breath. Vivian said nothing. Dante said nothing. And Lena turned around and walked back down the hallway, back down the stairs, back through the house that had never entirely been hers, out through the front door into the rain that had started while she was inside and was now coming down hard and straight, soaking through her coat before she reached the car. She sat behind the wheel. She put both hands on it. She did not cry. She did not yet know what she was going to do. She only knew, with a clarity so cold it felt surgical, that she was not going back through that door. Her phone lit up on the seat beside her. Dante calling. She watched it ring. She watched it stop. She watched it start again. She put the car in drive. It was 11:47 in the evening. She was 8 months pregnant. She had driven here because she forgot her prenatal vitamins and her back hurt, and she had wanted to sleep in her own bed. She drove to the city instead, to the only hotel where the staff knew her face and didn't know her husband's name, and she checked in with her credit card and her emergency bag in the trunk that she'd packed weeks ago for the hospital, and she went to the room and sat on the edge of the bed, and finally, in the dark, with the rain pressing against the glass, she put her hand on her stomach and talked to her child for the first time out loud. She said, I am going to figure this out. I promise you, I am going to figure this out. The baby moved, small and interior and real. Lena breathed. She opened her phone not to call Dante, not to call anyone who knew them both, and she called her attorney Miriam Cho, who had been drawing up quiet contingency documents for 4 months at Lena's request, because whatever else she was, Lena Marlowe had never been unprepared. Miriam answered on the second ring. It was nearly midnight. "Tell me what you need," Miriam said. "Everything we talked about. Start moving it in the morning. Are you safe?" She paused. "I need the business documentation ready. Everything in my name. It's ready, has been ready." Lena let out a long, slow breath. "Good." She lay back on the hotel bed without undressing. She kept her hand on her stomach. She stared at the ceiling and listened to the rain and began, in the methodical way that had always been her actual self, beneath everything Dante had covered over with his world and his weight, to think about what came next. Dante called 9 more times before midnight. She didn't answer any of them. She knew him well enough to know what each call contained. The first 2 would be low and controlled, explaining, positioning. The next 3 would have an edge, because he was not accustomed to unreturned calls. By 6 or 7, there would be something else in his voice, something that sounded like contrition, but functioned more like strategic vulnerability. The final ones would be the real thing, the version of Dante she had fallen in love with, the exhausted man underneath the machinery, the one who only surfaced when he had run out of angles. She was no longer available to be reached by any version. At 1:17 in the morning, a message came through from a number she didn't recognize. She opened it. 3 words she didn't mean anything. She turned the phone face down on the nightstand and closed her eyes. In the morning, she called her sister in Annapolis, who had spent 5 years waiting for Lena to admit the marriage was consuming her alive, and who answered the phone with immediate practical competence that made Lena feel, for the first time in hours, like she was no longer free-falling. "I need to stay somewhere quiet," Lena said, "and I need you not to tell anyone where I am." Her sister said, "How long?" "A while." "Good," her sister said simply and without elaboration, which was the only response Lena had the capacity to receive. She showered. She put on clean clothes from the emergency bag. She stood in front of the mirror in the hotel bathroom and looked at herself 8 months pregnant, steady-eyed, not crying, visibly alone, and she made a decision that she would remember for the rest of her life. She was done being the weight that balanced Dante Moretti's world. Whatever came next was going to be built on ground that belonged to her. She checked out at 8:15. She drove south into a morning that had cleared after the storm, the roads wet and empty, and leading away from everything that had been her life. And she didn't look in the rearview mirror. She was done looking back. At the Blackthorn estate, Dante had not slept. Vivian had left sometime after midnight. He didn't remember exactly when, couldn't reconstruct the sequence of the night with any precision because his mind kept returning to the moment in the doorway, to the specific quality of Lena's face, to the sound of the ring on the dresser, so small, barely audible, the most devastatingly small sound he had ever heard. He had told himself through the night that she needed time, that she would call, that Lena was practical above all things, and practical people needed to move through the first wave of emotion before they were capable of conversation. He called her again at 7, 8, 9:30. By noon, when Miriam Cho's office sent a formal notification that Mrs. Lena Moretti, née Marlowe, was initiating documentation review on several business entities held in her name, and that all correspondence regarding said entities was to be directed to Miriam Cho Esquire and not to Dante Moretti directly. By noon, Dante finally understood. She wasn't coming back. The understanding arrived not with noise, but with a silence that moved through him like cold water. Reaching places he hadn't known could feel anything. He sat in the chair by the window, the chair his father had sat in, the chair he'd always avoided sitting in because of what it meant, and for the first time in many years, the Moretti patriarch had no calculation running. No angle, no next move. Only the absence of a sound he had not known was constant until it stopped. Outside, the garden was wet from last night's rain. His mother had once loved that garden. Lena had started tending it 2 years ago quietly, without announcement, the way she did most things that mattered. He hadn't told her he'd noticed. He had never, in all the time he'd had, said, "I see you. I see everything you're doing. I know what you carrying me." The phone rang, his operations manager. Something about a shipment that needed decisions today, immediately, the kind of problem that had always snapped him back into function, into leadership, into the persona of the man who ran things and never showed damage. He let it ring. He looked at the garden. He was 38 years old, and he was beginning, with a slowness that felt like something physical, like something tearing, to understand the nature of what he had done. The garden was still wet at noon when Dante finally picked up the phone. Not to call Lena. He had stopped calling Lena at 10:17, when the 14th attempt went to voicemail, and he heard her recorded voice tell him she wasn't available and felt, for the first time in his adult life, that the word available had genuine weight. Like it was something a person could choose to be or not be. Like it was not a given. He called Tommy Ricci instead. Tommy was his operations manager, had been for 6 years, a compact, serious man from Bensonhurst who communicated primarily in the precise language of problems and their solutions, and who had learned early in his tenure that Dante Moretti did not appreciate elaboration. The shipment, Dante said, "We need a decision on the Camden route. Caruso's crew is waiting. Tell Caruso he'll wait until I tell him to stop waiting." A pause. "It's been 48 hours, Dante." Then it's been 48 hours. He ended the call. He sat another 20 minutes in his father's chair, which he had never intended to sit in today or any day, and then he stood up, because sitting hadn't producing anything useful, and movement was the only thing that had ever worked for him when his mind was running patterns he couldn't interrupt. He went to the kitchen. The housekeeper, Rosa, was at the counter, and she looked at him with the particular expression of a woman who had worked in this house for 11 years and understood precisely what the quality of silence in the rooms above her meant. She did not say anything. She put coffee in front of him without being asked. He drank it standing at the counter and stared at the window above the sink that looked out over the garden. And he could see, even from here, that someone had recently staked the climbing roses on the east trellis. New stakes, pale wood, carefully positioned. Lena. Sometime in the last week, while he had been on a call or in a meeting or otherwise absent from his own property, his wife had been in the garden staking roses. He set the cup down, Rosa. His voice came out lower than he intended. "Yes, Mr. Moretti? When did Mrs. Moretti last work on the garden?" Rosa thought about it. "Thursday, I think." "Early morning, before you were up Thursday. 4 days ago." While he had been sleeping, while he had been in his own house under the same roof, Lena had been outside in the early morning staking roses, and he had not known, and she had not told him, because she had stopped expecting him to want to know. "Thank you," he said. He went to the study and began making calls. Not about Lena. There was nothing to be done about Lena through phone calls. Miriam Cho's letter had made that architecturally clear, and Dante had spent enough time in rooms where leverage was the primary language to understand when the leverage had moved to the other side of the table. He made calls about business, about the Camden shipment, about a meeting that needed to be rescheduled, about the documentation review that Miriam Cho's office had initiated, and which his own attorney, Sal Frangioni, was already on, already generating counter-documentation, already constructing the legal scaffolding that would determine what Lena could and couldn't reach. Called at 2:15. "How bad is it?" Dante said. "Not a question. The business entities in her name are legitimately in her name, Dante. You put them there. Tax strategy, remember? 4 years ago. 11 businesses, clean money, paper perfect. She has full legal standing." Dante said nothing. "I can slow the process, but I can't change the ownership structure without her cooperation," which, based on the tone of Miriam Cho's correspondence, she is not inclined to. "How much?" Sal paused. "Total asset value across the 11 entities, somewhere between 38 and 44 million. The number landed in the room and stayed there. Dante had put those businesses in Lena's name because he trusted her more than he trusted the legal structures that protected everything else. He had done it as a form of intimacy, which was how Dante Moretti expressed trust not in words but in structural decisions, in the architecture of his world. He had put $38 million of clean assets in his wife's name because she was the one person he had believed would never use them against him. He had been right about that. Lena wasn't using them against him. She was using them to leave. There was a distinction, and it made everything worse. "Don't slow," he said. Sal went quiet for a moment. "Dante," I said, "don't slow it." He paused. "She can have what's hers." He hung up and sat very still at his desk for a long time. Then he opened the bottom drawer, where he kept the things that had no function in the actual running of his life: a watch his father had given him, that he never wore, a photograph from his wedding that the photographer had left as a proof, and he'd kept without framing, a folded piece of paper in Lena's handwriting from 2 years ago, a grocery list he'd found in his jacket pocket and not thrown away for reasons he had not examined. He looked at the grocery list. Milk, coffee, the specific brand of crackers his wife ate with soup in winter. Tulip bulbs, ? Check if planting season. He put it back in the drawer and closed it. Then he went back to work, because it was the only thing he knew how to do with any competence, and the empire did not pause for private disasters. The first indication that something larger was wrong came 4 days later. Dante was in a meeting at the back office of Carmine's, a restaurant that served as one of the organization's cleaner administrative locations, when Tommy came in through the side door with a face that was doing something complicated and controlled. Tommy was not a man whose face did complicated things in meetings. When Tommy's face went complicated, the room paid attention. Dante looked at him directly, which was the signal. Tommy said quietly to the table, "Give us a minute." The 3 men across the table, 2 crew captains, and a logistics coordinator left without comment. The door closed. "Benedetti's people hit the warehouse on Clymer Street last night," Tommy said. "Clean. They knew the layout. They knew the shift rotation." Dante's hand, which had been resting on the table, went very still. "How much?" 800,000 in transit product. "Maybe more. We're still counting." "Benedetti doesn't hit warehouses," Dante said. "He's been quiet for 2 years. He's not quiet anymore." Tommy put a folder on the table. "And it's not just the warehouse. There are 2 other things you need to see." The folder contained printouts, financial summaries, flagged transactions, a timeline assembled by the organization's internal accounting team. Dante read them slowly, the way he read things when the content was requiring him to override his first interpretation in favor of the accurate one. The accountant's name was Gerald Fitch. Gerald Fitch had been with the organization for 9 years, had managed the financial clearing operations across 7 of Dante's legitimate businesses, had been trusted with the architecture of how clean money moved from the organization's operations into the legal economy. Gerald Fitch had also, according to what Dante was looking at, been systematically siphoning from that architecture for somewhere between 14 and 18 months. The total missing, as best they could reconstruct it, was between $2.3 and $2.8 million. Gerald Fitch had not been to the office in 3 days. Dante set the folder down. He looked at the wall across from him, which had a framed photograph of the Verrazano Bridge that the previous owner of the restaurant had left. He looked at it for approximately 4 seconds. "When did we last have eyes on Fitch?" "Monday. He came in normal, left normal. Tuesday, he called in sick. Yesterday, nothing. His apartment in Astoria has been empty since at least Tuesday morning, based on the super's account. Family divorced. Kid in college in Ohio. We talked to the kid. He hasn't heard from his father in 2 weeks, which apparently is not unusual." Dante closed the folder. "Find him." "We're looking." "Look harder." He leaned back. "The warehouse hit and Fitch, are they connected?" Tommy's expression was the most honest answer he could give without saying the words. "We don't know yet." "Connected," Dante said flatly. "Someone is moving on multiple fronts. Benedetti doesn't have the reach to engineer an internal leak and a warehouse operation at the same time." This is Tommy stopped. "Someone is helping him," Dante said. "From this inside." He paused. "Or someone is running their own operation and using Benedetti as a weapon." The implications of that settled into the room like weather coming in. Dante stood up. "Bring me the full accounting on Fitch. Everything. Every transaction he touched in the last 2 years. And I want the Clymer Street crew in a room by tomorrow morning. I want to know who knew what about that shift rotation." "Already scheduled," Tommy said. "Good." He picked up his jacket from the chair. "One more thing. Where is Vivian Cross right now?" Tommy's pause lasted exactly 1 beat too long. "She's been working out of the Midtown office. She has a meeting there this afternoon." "Cancel it." Dante moved toward the door. "Tell her I need to see her. Here. Tonight." Tommy said nothing, which was its own form of commentary on the situation, and Dante did not acknowledge it, because there was nothing to acknowledge. He walked out into the restaurant's main room, past the lunch tables where ordinary people were eating ordinary meals, and out through the front door into the November cold, where his driver was waiting and the city was going on around him at its usual indifferent pace, and he stood on the sidewalk for a moment and breathed the cold air and ran the numbers. Multiple fronts. Coordinated or coincidental, he needed to know which. Fitch's disappearance predated the warehouse hit, which meant either Fitch had been extracted by someone who knew what was coming and didn't want him caught in the crossfire, or Fitch had run because his siphoning had been discovered from another angle. Either answer pointed at the same general direction. Someone with access to internal information had been operational for a long time, patient and methodical, waiting for the right moment. Dante had seen this kind of campaign before. His father had built the organization to withstand it. What his father had not built into the organization was any mechanism for surviving it when the intelligence source was close enough to know the layout of the warehouse and the shift rotation and the accounting architecture all at once. That kind of access was not Benedetti's. Benedetti was a blunt instrument. Someone was pointing him. He got in the car and told his driver to take him to the Midtown office, and then he sat in the back and stared at the city moving past the window and, without deciding to, thought about Lena. Not strategically, not in the context of the business. Simply thought about her, the quality of her in a room, the specific way she had of being present that made everything else in the space organize itself differently. He thought about the staked roses. He thought about the grocery list in the bottom drawer. He thought about the sound of the ring on the dresser, that small deliberate sound, and he pressed his jaw together until it ached and looked at the city and made himself stop. He could not afford Lena right now. What he could afford was total concentration on whoever was trying to take his organization apart, while his personal life had left him operationally compromised in ways he was only beginning to inventory. The timing, he thought. The timing of all of this. And then, for the first time, a thought arrived that he immediately pushed away because it was too large and too cold and he was not ready for it. The thought was this: what if the timing was not coincidental? He pushed it away. He arrived at the Midtown office. He walked through his day with the focused competence that had always been his primary professional asset. He made decisions. He directed resources. He managed the emerging crisis with the specific calm of someone who had been managing crises his entire adult life and knew that panic was simply intelligence going to waste. At 8:15 in the evening, he returned to Carmine's. Vivian was already there, waiting in the back room. She was wearing a dark coat she hadn't taken off, which told him she had been uncertain whether she would be staying. She was sitting straight in the chair, both hands on the table, and her dark eyes tracked him from the moment he entered the room, the way the eyes of someone tracking where the exits are. Dante sat down across from her and looked at her for a long moment without speaking. Vivian was 36 years old. She had an MBA from Wharton and a professional history that, when he'd had it checked 3 years ago before bringing her in, had been exactly as presented. She had never given him a reason to question her competence or her loyalty. She was contained and precise, and she had, he acknowledged privately, made him feel understood during the 18 months when Lena had become increasingly opaque to him, when the distance between them had grown, and he had told himself it was the expansion, the pressure, the nature of the work. He had told himself a lot of things. The Clymer Street warehouse, he said. She met his eyes. I heard. I'm sorry. Who knew the layout? Anyone who had been through the logistics documentation, which is not many people. List them. She gave him names. 6 people, including Tommy, including herself. Her voice was steady. Her hands were still. Fitch, Dante said. Something shifted in her face. Not much. A micro-expression, the kind you miss if you're not looking for it. But Dante Moretti had spent his entire adult life in rooms where the smallest expressions carried the most information, and he did not miss it. What do you know about Fitch? He said. He managed the accounting for 7 of our businesses. I know what he managed. What do you know about where he is? He's missing, she said carefully. Tommy told me when he called. Before Tommy called, Dante said. The room went very still. Vivian held his gaze. She was good. She was genuinely, professionally good, and in other circumstances, Dante might have appreciated it. I don't know what you're suggesting. I'm not suggesting anything. He leaned forward slightly. I'm asking directly. Did you know Fitch was leaving? No. Were you aware he had been taking money from the clearing operations? Absolutely not. Did you know about the Clymer Street operation before it happened? Dante. Her voice had an edge now. We've worked together for 3 years. Did you know? Not a question. The specific flatness of a man who has run out of the patience for anything other than a direct answer. Vivian looked at him, and something in her eyes changed, not broke, not crumbled, but shifted, like a door closing on a room she'd been keeping open. No, she said, I didn't know. He sat back. He looked at her for another long moment. And then he said quietly, with the specific toneless quality of his voice, when he had made a decision, I'm going to find out what happened. All of it. And if it turns out that anyone in this organization had prior knowledge of either situation, the accounting, or the warehouse, the conversation we have at that point will be very different from this one. She nodded. Her face was composed. He stood. Don't go anywhere for the next few days. I need you available. Of course, she said. He left. He got back in the car. He sat in the silence of the back seat for 4 blocks before he pulled out his phone and called a man named Gregor, who operated in a space somewhat adjacent to the organization and whose specific skill was finding things that people had tried very hard to prevent from being found. I need you to pull everything on Vivian Cross, Dante said. Not the official file, the real one. Financial history, communications, associations, anything that's been cleaned up in the last 3 years. I need it fast. How fast? Yesterday, Dante said and ended the call. 300 miles south, Lena Marlowe was sitting in a blue wooden house 4 blocks from the Atlantic Ocean in a town called Harrow Cove, where her college roommate Caroline had lived for 11 years, and where no one knew the Moretti name because no one needed to. The house was small, and the ceilings were low, and it smelled like sea salt and old wood. And Lena had been there for 6 days and had slept, on average 10 hours each night, which was more sleep than she had gotten in any single night for the preceding 18 months. Caroline was a pediatric nurse, practical and warm and incapable of sustained dramatic emotion, which made her the precise right person for Lena to be near. She did not press. She cooked. She watched television in the evenings with her feet up on the coffee table and made room on the couch without making a production of it. And when Lena cried for the first time day 3, unexpectedly, standing at the kitchen window watching a fishing boat on the water, completely without warning, Caroline simply put a hand on her back and left it there until it was over. Miriam Cho called on day 5. The documentation transfer is proceeding. Dante's attorney has indicated he won't contest the entities, which means he's letting me have them, Lena said.
Yes.
She absorbed that.
Okay.
Lena, I need to ask you something directly. Go ahead. Do you want to come back to New York at all for any part of this process? Because we can structure everything remotely, but if there's any possibility of mine, there isn't, said. Do it remotely. All of it. After she hung up, she went for a walk along the waterfront, moving slowly because of her back. And she watched the water, and she let herself think about the future with the deliberate, systematic focus she'd been holding back for days. Because she had needed the sleep before she could think clearly. She had 11 businesses and access to the accounts that ran them. She had Miriam Cho and 3 weeks before her due date and a spare bedroom in a blue house by the ocean. She had her graduate degree and 12 years of experience running a nonprofit and a mind that worked better under pressure than in comfort, which had always been both her advantage and her problem. She did not have her husband. She did not have the life she had spent 4 years building in the Westchester estate. She did not have the future she had imagined in the quiet moments when she had still been capable of imagining it. Dante changed, softer, the baby making him see what she had been trying for years to show him. She let herself feel the loss of that imagined future, specifically, deliberately, standing by the water. She gave it 30 seconds. Then she made herself a list. Back at the house that evening, Caroline asked, "Are you going to tell me what you want to do? Not what you need to do. What you want." Lena thought about it. "I want to build something of my own. Something that has nothing to do with his name or his money or his world. The businesses are a foundation. They're not what I want." She paused. "I want to raise my child somewhere where she doesn't grow up afraid. Where I don't spend every night waiting for the other shoe." Caroline nodded. "So, somewhere other than New York." "Yes, here?" Lena looked around the small warm room. "Maybe." She put her hand on her stomach. "I need more time." "You have time," Caroline said. "Take it." It was the most useful thing anyone had said to Lena in a long time. In New York, Dante's week deteriorated with a consistency that suggested design. On Wednesday, the police department's organized crime division executed search warrants on 2 of his businesses, not the ones in Lena's name, but 2 of the operational structures that had functioned untouched for the better part of a decade. The warrants were narrow enough that nothing material was at risk, but the action itself was a signal, a demonstration that someone with law enforcement had been feeding information upstream, and the information was current and specific enough to identify these particular businesses at this particular time. Dante's attorney reached him while he was still getting the news from Tommy. "They had fresh intelligence," Sal said. "This isn't a cold file situation. Someone talked recently," I know Dante said. "Dante, this is..." "I know, Sal." He kept his voice flat and controlled. "Handle the warrants. I'll handle the rest." On Thursday, Gregor called. "You want the short version or the full version?" Gregor said. "Both. Short, Vivian Cross has been in communication with representatives of the Benedetti organization for approximately 7 months. Financial transfers small, careful, routed through 3 layers, indicate she has been compensated for information. The information provided includes operational logistics, personnel schedules, and accounting structures." A pause. Full version is a 60-page document I can have to you by end of day. Dante held the phone very still. 7 months. Starting approximately March of this year. March. He ran the timeline in his head. March was when the expansion had reached its peak complexity. March was when he had been most distracted, most overwhelmed by the scale of what he was managing. March was also, he noted with the cold precision of someone assembling a picture he did not want to see completed, when Vivian had begun spending extended periods at the Blackthorn estate. The Fitch situation, Dante said. Is she connected? Fitch was her recruitment. She identified him, approached him, set up the siphoning structure. She's been managing him for 14 months. Dante breathed once, slowly through his nose. The police warrants. The intelligence provided to OCD came through a law firm connected to the Benedetti organization. The source material matches Vivian's access level exactly. She's still in the city, Dante said. I told her to stay available. She's been in contact with Benedetti's people twice since your meeting Wednesday night. Once by phone, once in person at a coffee shop on 54th Street. We have photographs. The weight of it settled over Dante, not shock, not fury, but something heavier than both. Fury was for things that surprised you. This surprised him, and it didn't, and the combination of those two responses was what made it unbearable. He had looked at Vivian Cross and asked her directly. She had looked back and said no, and he had almost believed her, and now he was sitting with the full picture of what she had done, and for how long and from how close, and he was recognizing, with a clarity that felt like something being removed from his chest without anesthesia, that she had been inside the house, inside his personal life, inside the spaces that Lena had occupied and that he had let Vivian occupy when Lena had become unavailable to him. He had handed Vivian everything she needed. He had done it because he was lonely, because Lena had gone quiet and he had stopped trying to reach her, and he had told himself that Vivian was simply convenient, simply present, simply a distraction from the specific pain of a marriage that had stopped feeling like a marriage. And the whole time, Vivian Cross had been methodically destroying him. Send me everything, Dante said. Full file. He hung up. He put the phone on the desk and sat very still in his study, in the house where the roses were staked in the garden and the ring was still on the dresser because he had not been able to make himself pick it up, and he stayed there with the complete picture of what his year had been and what he had allowed and what he had done and what it had cost him. Then he picked the phone back up. Tommy, he said, bring Vivian Cross in. Tonight. Don't tell her it's me who's asking. Tell her we have a financial emergency and she's needed. Tommy's pause was 2 full seconds. And when we have her. I need to talk to her, Dante said. That's all. I need to hear it from her directly. Dante, I'm not going to touch her, Tommy. His voice was completely even. I need to hear her say it. That's all. Another pause. All right, he set the phone down. He stood. He walked to the window and looked at the garden in the November dark, where the staked roses were invisible but present, held in place by wood and careful attention, waiting for a season that would determine whether they had survived. At 10:40 that night, Vivian Cross did not arrive at the meeting location Tommy had described. At 10:52, Tommy called. His voice, for the first time in 6 years of working together, had something in it that Dante had never heard before. Something close to unsteady. She's gone, Tommy said. Her apartment is cleared out. Cars at the airport. We think she was on a flight by 9. She must have moved the moment we called. The silence on the line stretched. She took the accounting files, Tommy said quietly, the full set, everything she had access to. Dante stood in his study and looked at nothing. There's something else, Tommy said. She left an envelope. At the Midtown office. Addressed to you. What's in it? A pause, a photograph, and a note. What does the note say? Tommy read it, 4 sentences, read in the flat, careful voice of a man who understood that the words he was saying were going to matter in ways that couldn't be predicted. Dante listened, and when Tommy finished, the silence that came after it was the kind of silence that does not fill back up, that stays, and changes the shape of the room around it. The photograph was of Lena, taken from a distance, but clear enough. A coastal town, a waterfront, a blue house visible in the background. Lena walking slowly, her hand on her stomach, her face turned toward the water. The note said, she's not as hidden as she thinks. Benedetti knows where she is. Consider this professional courtesy. I gave you the chance to find her first. Dante had the phone to his ear before the last word landed. Get me a car, he said. Now. The car was on the highway before Dante had finished giving Tommy the second set of instructions. He sat in the back with the photograph in his hand, and his phone pressed to his ear, and his mind running the geometry of the situation with the cold mechanical focus that had always been his best quality and his worst one best, because it worked. Worst because it required him to compress everything human about the problem into something he could calculate around. And right now, the human part of the problem was Lena, 8 months pregnant, 4 blocks from the Atlantic Ocean, and Benedetti's people had known where she was for long enough to take a photograph. "I need eyes on Harrow Cove immediately," he said to Tommy. "Whatever we have in that area, anyone, any contact, I don't care how peripheral. I need confirmation she's still in the house." "Working on it," Tommy said. "I've got a guy in Providence. He can be there in 90 minutes. Tell him 80. Dante, it's a 4-hour drive from the city too. Then I'll be there in 4 hours." He looked at the photograph again. The blue house in the background. The waterfront. Lena's hand on her stomach. "Get me everything on Benedetti's current operations. Who he's using for field work. Whether this is surveillance only or whether he's already moved people into position. I'm pulling it now." Tommy's keyboard in the background fast and continuous. "There's something else you need to know." Dante waited. "The 2 businesses OCD hit with warrants on Wednesday. They've expanded the investigation. Sal got word an hour ago they're looking at a 3rd property. The one on Vesey Street. Vesey Street was the organizational center of the entire financial clearing operation. Not the businesses in Lena's name, those were clean, paper-perfect, untouchable. The Vesey Street property was different. If OCD reached Vesey Street with a warrant that had current intelligence behind it, the damage would not be containable. "Vivian gave them Vesey Street," Dante said. "It wasn't a question. Has to be. Nobody else had that full picture." He pressed his eyes closed for 1 second. 1 full second of not calculating, not managing, just registering the scale of the thing that Vivian Cross had built. Inside his operation, over 7 months while he had been distracted by the expansion and the distance from his wife and the specific loneliness of a man who had confused proximity with intimacy. 7 months of Vivian in his orbit, in his house, at his table, and the entire time she had been feeding the architecture of everything he'd built to people who wanted him gone. He opened his eyes. Sal needs to slow the Vesey Street situation. Whatever legal motion he can file it. Buy me time. How much time do you need? Enough to get to Lena and get her somewhere safe. After he stopped. After that was a sense he didn't have the end of yet. One thing at a time. The car moved through the dark at the kind of speed that required a specific relationship with the driver, and his driver, Marco Mo, had been with him 8 years and understood without being told that tonight was not a night for caution. The highway opened up north of the city, the November darkness thick on both sides, and Dante sat with the photograph and ran numbers and tried not to think about what it meant that someone had been watching Lena without his knowledge, watching her walk by the water, watching the blue house, counting the days. He tried not to think about what Benedetti might want with her. The obvious answers were leverage or elimination. Leverage meant she was valuable alive. Elimination meant someone had decided the cleanest solution to the Moretti problem was to remove the things Moretti still had left to lose. He did not let himself stay on that thought. He moved to the next calculation. At the 2-hour mark, Tommy called back. "My guy in Providence made contact with a local. We have a visual on the house. Lights are on. There's movement inside, looks like 2 people. Dante breathed. She's there, as of 30 minutes ago, yes. And Benedetti's people? A pause that lasted too long. We found a car. Parked on the street 2 blocks from the waterfront. Rental, registered to a shell company we've seen Benedetti use before. It's been there since at least this morning." The cold that moved through Dante then was not the November air. It was the specific cold of understanding how close the margin was. Vivian's note had said, "Consider this professional courtesy," which meant she had told Benedetti where Lena was, and then, for reasons of her own that Dante didn't yet understand, had also told Dante. She had lit both ends of the wire and then stepped back to watch. The car, Dante said. "How many people? Unknown. Could be 1. Could be 2. We can't get close enough for a visual without tipping them." "Don't tip them." He checked the time. "I'm 90 minutes out. Keep eyes on the house. If anything moves, if anyone approaches that house, you call me instantly, and you call your Providence contact, and you tell him to get between them and that house regardless of what it costs." Dante, "Whatever it costs, Tommy." A silence, understood. He put the phone down on the seat beside him and looked at the road unspooling in the headlights. 90 minutes. The car that was already parked 2 blocks away from his pregnant wife. The photograph that Vivian had left in an envelope as a parting demonstration of how completely she had outmaneuvered him. He picked up the phone again. He called a number he had not called in 2 years, a man named Arciero, who had worked adjacent to both the Moretti organization and several federal agencies in a capacity that was deliberately difficult to categorize, and who owed Dante a specific debt from a specific situation in 2019 that neither of them had ever discussed openly. The phone rang 4 times. "It's late," Arciero said. "I know." Dante kept his voice level. "I need to call in what you owe me." Another pause. Longer this time. "What do you need?" "Benedetti, his current field team. Whatever the federal side has on their location and movements in New England in the last 72 hours. And I need it fast." "Dante, what you're describing is—" "I know what I'm describing. And I know what 2019 cost you and what it would have cost you if I hadn't made a phone call. So I'm making one now. Tonight." The silence on the line had a different quality from Tommy's silences. This one had the weight of a man calculating a debt that had been outstanding for 2 years and deciding whether it was cheaper to pay it now or let it compound. "Give me 45 minutes, Arciero said. "You have 30. He ended the call. He sat back. The car moved through the dark. At the 90-minute mark, Dante was 20 minutes outside Harrow Cove when everything changed. Tommy called. His voice was wrong from the first syllable, tight and high, in a way Tommy's voice had never been in 6 years, and that wrongness landed in Dante's chest before the words did. "They moved," Tommy said. "The car, it moved. My Providence contact followed it. They went to the waterfront, Dante, they parked at the waterfront, and 2 men got out, and— Where is she? Not a question. A demand made from someplace below language. She went for a walk. She does it every night, apparently. The neighbor told my contact she walks along the waterfront after dinner, same route, every night since she got there. The pattern, of course. He knew Lena. He knew she was a creature of pattern when she was stressed. She walked to think. She always had, and she would have established a route within the first 2 days, and she would have walked it every night because it helped her, and because in Harrow Cove, in a town where nobody knew her name, she had felt safe enough to be predictable. Vivian had known Lena, had spent enough time at the estate to know how Lena moved, how she thought, what she did when she needed to process. Vivian had given Benedetti's people not just an address, but a schedule. "My guy is moving toward them now. He had to park 3 blocks away. He's on foot. The line went muffled. A sound in the background that Dante couldn't identify. Then Tommy came back, his voice at a completely different register. "There's shooting, Dante. 2 shots, I can hear it through the phone. My guy was already leaning forward, Marco. Everything you have now." The car surged, the dark rushed past. Dante held the phone pressed to his ear with both hands, his knuckles white, and listened to the muffled chaos on the other end of the line while the distance between him and Lena collapsed at 110 miles an hour. "Talk to me," Dante said. "Tommy, talk to me." I'm trying to reach him, shuffling. Then nothing. Then he's not answering. My contact is not answering his phone. Dante said nothing. He pressed his jaw together until the ache spread up into his temples. He breathed through his nose. He ran the distance in his mind. 12 minutes, 11. The car taking a curve at a speed that pushed him sideways in the seat, and he didn't register it, because all of him was somewhere on a waterfront in the dark, calculating. His phone buzzed. "Unknown number," he answered. A man's voice, not Tommy's contact, not anyone he recognized. Flat and professional, the voice of someone doing a job rather than conducting a conversation. "Mr. Moretti, your wife is unharmed. She is currently with us. We would like to discuss a mutually beneficial arrangement." The temperature in Dante's body dropped several degrees. "Eddie," he said. "Mr. Benedetti sends his regards. He is not an unreasonable man. Neither, I'm told, are you." Dante looked at the back of Marco's head. At the road. At the dark. He breathed once. "Put her on the phone." A pause. Voices in the background, indistinct. Then Lena. Dante. Her voice was steady. Controlled. Lena being Lena even now, even here, not giving anyone in the room the satisfaction of hearing her afraid. But underneath the steadiness, there was something that was not fear exactly, but adjacent to it, a tightness, a compression. The voice of a woman managing herself with conscious effort because she could not afford to stop. "Are you hurt?" he said. "No, then we're fine." A pause. "Don't do anything stupid." The man's voice came back. "As you can hear, she is in good health." Mr. Benedetti's position is straightforward. He would like a conversation. In person. Tomorrow morning. The location will be provided. You come alone and Mrs. Moretti returns to her. Dante ended the call. Marco looked in the rearview mirror. "Boss, keep driving," Dante said. He called Tommy. "Get me a location." Benedetti's people have her. She said we're fine. She said the baby is fine, but I need to know where they're holding her. Any signal from her phone? Any? Already running it, Tommy said. His voice was doing the complicated thing again. There's something else. My Providence contact, he checked in, he's alive. He took around in the shoulder, but he's mobile. He says there was a third man, Dante, at the scene. Someone who was not Benedetti's people. Dante went still. Explain a third man. My contact saw him on the waterfront before the shooting started, said he didn't fit with Benedetti's crew. Wrong positioning, wrong behavior. When the shots were fired, this man moved toward Lena, not away. My contact thinks Tommy paused. He thinks the third man tried to intervene, and then he was gone. Contact lost him in the dark. Dante processed this for 3 seconds. Vivian's note said professional courtesy. She told us where Lena was. Right, but she also told someone else. Someone who wasn't supposed to let Benedetti reach her. He looked out the window. The outskirts of a coastal town, small dark houses, a gas station with one light on. Very close now. There's a third player, Tommy. Someone who doesn't want Benedetti to have leverage over me any more than Vivian did. Who benefits from that? Someone who wants functional, Dante said. Someone who needs me operational and not compromised. Which means someone who wants what I have, or who needs what I can do, and knows that a dead wife or a leveraged wife makes me useless. He saw the waterfront, the dark water, the street lamps throwing their light in patches. Marco slowed without being told. Stop here, Dante said. He got out of the car. The night air was cold and salted, and the ocean was making its patient noise 40 yards away. He stood on the sidewalk and looked at the waterfront, and thought about everything at once, Lena's voice on the phone. Steady and compressed and afraid underneath, the sound of it living in his chest like something that had been placed there with force. His phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. An address. A warehouse on the north edge of town, near the marina. He looked at it. He looked at the waterfront. He thought about calling Tommy, about waiting for backup, about the 12 tactical calculations that any reasonable person in his position would run before walking toward an address sent by an unknown contact in a town where Benedetti's people had already fired shots. He put the phone in his pocket and started walking. The warehouse was a fish processing facility that had been shuttered for 2 seasons based on the rust on the locks and then the smell that was industrial and old rather than active. A light was on inside, visible through a high window, the yellow-white of a work lamp rather than overhead fluorescence. The main door was not locked. It was, in fact, slightly ajar, which was either an invitation or a trap, and both possibilities required him to enter anyway, because Lena was somewhere inside. He pushed the door open with his shoulder and stepped in. The space was large and cold, concrete floor, metal shelving along the walls, the work lamp on a stand in the center throwing a circle of yellow light that left the perimeter in shadow. 2 men stood at the edge of the light, Benedetti's people, recognizable by type, if not by face, the specific build and stillness of men who did this for a living. Between them, seated in a metal chair, was Lena. She looked up when he entered. Her face did something complicated, relief and fury and something else. Something that was not for the men in the room but for him, a private communication between 2 people who had been married for 4 years and knew each other's faces better than was always comfortable. The something else said, "We will talk about the fact that you walked in here alone. Later, when I am not in this chair." He looked at her. She was upright, hands in her lap, coat still on, no visible injury. Her color was better than he expected, which meant the fear was internal, and she was managing it, which was Lena at her most Lena, swallowing the thing that would give someone else power and giving back nothing. "She's okay," he said, not to the men, to himself. "She's fine," one of the men said. "Like we told you." A door opened at the back of the warehouse. A third man entered, older, heavier, moving with the deliberate pace of someone who was used to being the last person to arrive anywhere because everyone else was already waiting. This was not Benedetti himself. Dante knew Benedetti's face from 20 years of operating in overlapping spaces. This was a representative. Senior enough to make decisions, deniable enough to be in a room like this. "Mr. Moratti," the man said. "Thank you for coming." "Let her go," Dante said. "Then we can talk." "We'll talk first." "No." The flatness in his voice was absolute. Not anger, something beyond anger, something that had passed through fury and come out the other side into a place that was very cold and very clear. "She goes first. Then whatever you have to say, I'll hear it." The man studied him. This was the moment, the read, the assessment of how serious the person across from you actually was. Dante had been through this calculation from both sides enough times to know that what the other person was looking for was not strength exactly, but the specific quality of someone who had already decided what they would accept and what they wouldn't, and who had no remaining uncertainty about which side of that line they were on. The man nodded to his people. One of them moved to Lena and stepped back from her chair, not release permission to stand. She stood. Her hand went to her lower back for a moment, a reflexive press against the ache that had been there for weeks, and Dante saw it and his jaw tightened. She leaves the building, Dante said. Another pause. She stays in the parking area. My people with her. One person. And she keeps her phone. Agreed. Lena walked toward the door. She passed within 3 feet of Dante on her way, and she stopped for exactly cents on second, full stopped second, and she looked at him. Not with forgiveness, not with warmth, with something that was purely and specifically Lena, a look that said, I see you here. I see what you came to do. We are not resolved, but I see. Then she walked out. The door closed. Dante turned back to the room. The representative said, Mr. Benedetti's position is uncomplicated. He wants the VZ Street operation. Not the businesses in your wife's name, those are of no interest to him. The VZ Street clearing structure, full transfer of operational control. And in exchange, Dante said, Benedetti's organization steps back. The police intelligence dries up. You operate what's left without interference. Dante looked at the man. He thought about VC Street, what it represented, how long it had taken to build the architecture of it, the hundreds of millions that had passed through its structure over a decade. He thought about what remained if VC Street was gone. He thought about Fitch's missing money in the warehouse on Clymer Street and the warrants and Vivian's warrants and Sile and the 7 months of systematic dismantling of everything he'd built. He thought about Lena outside in the cold with her hand on her back and her coat wrapped around 8 months of his child. I'll need 48 hours, he said.
You have 24.
Then I'll need 24 hours, Dante said. And Benedetti needs to understand that whatever I agree to tonight, I agree to once and completely. There is no second conversation, no additional terms. This is the only deal I will make. The man nodded. He understands, does he? Dante looked at him steadily. Because what I'm hearing is that someone inside my organization provided Benedetti with 7 months of intelligence. That same person also provided Benedetti with the location of my pregnant wife. And now Benedetti wants to use my wife as leverage to take the one asset I have left that functions. He paused. That's not an uncomplicated position. That's a declaration. The man's face was neutral, practiced. Mr. Benedetti views it as an opportunity. Mr. Benedetti, Dante said, should be very careful about what he calls an opportunity. His voice did not rise. It did not need to. 24 hours. I'll be in touch. He turned. He walked to the door. He pushed it open and went out into the night air, and the cold hit him like a hand to the chest. And he walked to where Lena was standing near the building's corner with Benedetti's man 3 feet away, and he came to stand in front of her, and he said quietly, Can you walk? I've been walking, she said. I walked here. They didn't. No. She looked at him. Her voice was controlled, but her eyes were doing something they didn't do when she was simply angry. Something processed into something harder. Something that had calcified in the last 2 hours into a kind of furious knowledge. How did they know where I was, Dante? He held her gaze. He did not look away, Vivian. Something moved across Lena's face. Not surprised, the surprise had already happened and been absorbed and converted. What moved across her face now was the specific expression of a woman confirming something she had suspected and had not allowed herself to fully believe. A terrible completion. The same woman, Lena said. She knew where I was. Yes, she gave them where I was. And then she told me, he paused. She told both of us. I don't fully understand why yet. Lena breathed in through her nose, slow and deliberate. Her hand was on her stomach. She was doing the thing she always did when she needed to process something that was larger than the available space for it, compressing it, holding it, dealing with the surface requirements first. I need to sit down, she said. My back. Car's a block away. Then take me to the car. He started to reach for her arm. She stepped back slightly, not dramatically, not a scene, simply a repositioning that said, not yet, we are not there yet. He absorbed it. He walked beside her without touching her, keeping his body between her and Benedetti's man, who was trailing them at a distance, and they walked the block to the car in silence. Marco had the door open by the time they reached it. Lena got in. Dante went around to the other side. The door closed, and the car was quiet and warm, and Benedetti's man stood on the sidewalk watching them, and then turned and walked back toward the warehouse. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Lena said, I want to go back to the house. I need my things. It's not safe to— I'm not asking for your assessment of what's safe, she said. Her voice was not loud. It was the specific quiet of someone who has been frightened and is now on the other side of it and is dealing with the anger that was underneath the fear the whole time. I want to go back to Caroline's house and get my things, and I want to go somewhere that isn't here, he said. Okay, I don't want you in the house. Okay, I don't— She stopped. She pressed her hand harder against her lower back. She closed her eyes for 2 seconds. When she opened them, there was something on her face that he hadn't seen before, not in 4 years of knowing her. A kind of exhaustion that went below the physical, below the emotional, all the way to something structural. I don't want any of this anywhere near my daughter, Dante. The word landed, daughter. He hadn't known. She hadn't told him. They had not discussed it, had chosen not to find out, had agreed early in the pregnancy to wait, and he had not spoken to her since she left, and she had not told him, and he had not known that the child he had been calculating around, the abstraction of the baby, was a daughter. He sat with it. He did not perform a reaction. He did not say anything for a long moment, because anything he could say would be inadequate, and she was not in a condition for inadequacy. Then he said, I know. You don't get to just— She stopped again. The compression was working less well now. He could see at the edges of her control fraying, not from weakness, but from the simple human impossibility of holding this much together in this particular moment. In a car, after 2 hours of being held in a warehouse by men, her husband's former lover had directed toward her. I left. I made a clean break. I had a plan, Dante. I had everything arranged. And then her jaw tightened. And then your world followed me here. Your decisions followed me here. I did everything right, and it followed me anyway. He had nothing to say to that, because she was not wrong. She had done everything right. She had left cleanly, built walls, gone somewhere quiet, Kyneson stayed out of it, and the wreckage of his choices had traveled 300 miles and found her anyway, because that was the nature of the life he had built. It did not stay contained. It did not respect the boundaries of people who had decided to step outside it. It leaked through every structure you built around it because it was built on the foundational assumption that nothing was beyond reach. He had built that world. He had believed it was manageable. He had believed it could coexist with a marriage and a life and a daughter. He had been catastrophically wrong. I'm going to handle what needs to be handled, he said. And then I need to tell you something. Not tonight. Tonight you need to sleep, and I need to make sure you're somewhere safe. But after that, I need to tell you the full picture. What's happened, what I know, what I'm going to do. She looked at him. Why? Because you deserve to know what you're actually dealing with. Not the version I decide you can handle. The full picture. She searched his face. He let her. He had learned, somewhere in the last 2 hours of driving through the dark toward a waterfront in a town he'd never been to, that the performance of composure was a form of distance. And distance was what had built the wall between them. And the wall was what Vivian Cross had walked through and turned into a weapon. Tonight, Lena said finally, I go back to the house. You don't come in. In the morning, you tell me. Yes. And then I decide what I do with what you tell me. Yes, he said, that's yours. That decision has always been yours. The car moved. The waterfront receded. Lena turned her face toward the window, and he could see the reflection of her in the dark glass, her profile, her hand still resting on her stomach, her eyes open and fixed on something in the middle distance that was neither here nor there, but somewhere inside herself, where she was still working through what the night had cost her. At the blue house, Caroline was on the porch before the car stopped moving. She had clearly been awake and waiting, and her face had the specific expression of a woman who had been imagining worst-case scenarios for 2 hours and was now running an inventory of visible damage. She came down the steps and went directly to Lena and put both arms around her, and Lena, who had held herself together through the warehouse and the walk and the car, and everything leaned into it for exactly 4 seconds before she straightened. Dante stood beside the car and watched. He did not approach. He had said he wouldn't come in, and he wouldn't. Caroline looked at him over Lena's shoulder. The look said many things. He received all of them. Lena pulled back from Caroline. She turned and looked at Dante. In the porch light, she looked pale and tired, and 8 months pregnant, and like herself, entirely and specifically herself, the woman he had met in a hotel bar who had looked at him and seen the exhausted man underneath the machinery before anyone had told her to look. Tomorrow, she said. Tomorrow, he agreed. She went inside. The door closed. He stood on the sidewalk in the cold for a moment. Then he got back in the car. His phone rang immediately. Tommy, which meant the 24-hour clock had already started, and Benedetti's people were already operational, and he had an empire that was hemorrhaging from multiple wounds simultaneously, and a daughter he hadn't known about until 40 minutes ago, and a decision he needed to make before morning. "Tell me," Dante said. Tommy told him. The VC Street warrant had been accelerated. OCD was moving faster than Sal could counter. Benedetti's organization had already begun making contact with Dante's crew captains, individually, with offers that Dante couldn't yet confirm, but could accurately predict: defection terms, protection in exchange for intelligence, the systematic disassembly of loyalty that happened when a power structure started visibly failing. And then Tommy said the thing that changed the shape of the night entirely. Gregor found something in the full file on Vivian, something he missed in the first pass. Tommy's voice was careful in the specific way of someone delivering information they have checked twice because they did not want to deliver it wrong. She wasn't working for Benedetti originally, Dante. Benedetti was the second relationship. The first, going back almost 2 years, was with the federal task force. The car went very quiet. She was a federal informant, Tommy said. Before Benedetti ever approached her. Before she ever came to us. 2 years. She had come to them as a plant, credentialed and calm and already wired, already operational, already building the file that would eventually be used to execute a warrant on VC Street. And then, somewhere along the way, Benedetti had found her, or she had found Benedetti, and she had decided that one handler wasn't enough, that the play was bigger than she'd been contracted for, that she could serve the federal interest and Benedetti's interest simultaneously and walk away with enough to disappear entirely, which was exactly what she had done. She was never loyal to anyone, Dante said. Not us, not Benedetti. Just herself, looks like it. He sat with the full picture. 2 years. From the beginning. The entire expansion, the entire period of distance from Lena, the entire architecture of his professional and personal failure, Vivian Cross had been inside it from the start, not manufacturing the cracks, but certainly weakening everyone she found. There's one more thing, Tommy said. The third man at the waterfront. My Providence contact described him to Gregor. Gregor says the description matches the federal who's been associated with Vivian's case file. Dante understood immediately. The third man was federal. He was there to protect Lena, or to make sure Benedetti didn't get leverage that would complicate their case. Either way, he looked out the window at the dark coastline, at the town going about its quiet business around the wreckage of his evening. Either way, the federal side knows Lena was targeted, which means I have something they'd want Benedetti to have, which means you might have leverage you didn't know you had this morning. Dante thought about it, about Benedetti's 24 hours, about VC Street, about the crew captains being approached with defection offers, about an empire that was coming apart at every seam simultaneously, the result of 2 years of patient and methodical destruction by a woman who had sat at his table and looked at his wife and known exactly what she was doing. He thought about Lena inside the Blue House, about a daughter he hadn't known existed until 40 minutes ago, about the specific sound of Lena's voice on the phone in the warehouse were fine, steady and compressed, and refusing to give anyone the satisfaction. He had spent 20 years building something that had just been used against everything he had. He had one move left, maybe. Get me Arciero, Dante said. Not in 30 minutes this time. Arciero answered on the first ring this time. That alone told Dante something. A man who made you wait 30 minutes on a Tuesday answered on the first ring at 1 in the morning, only when he already knew what the call was about. Which meant Arciero had been expecting it. Which meant the federal side had been watching this particular night unfold with the specific attention of people who had a stake in how it ended. You know why I'm calling, Dante said. I have a general sense, Arciero said. His voice was the careful neutral of someone speaking from a position of incomplete certainty, not ignorant, not fully informed, threading the distance between the two with professional precision. Vivian Cross. Dante kept his voice low. Marco was driving without destination, circling the coastal streets of Harrow Cove at 30 miles an hour, and the car was the only private space Dante currently had. She was yours before she was Benedetti's. A pause of exactly 3 seconds. That's a complicated statement. It's a factual one. I'm not interested in complicated tonight. My wife was taken off a public street 8 hours ago. Your people were at the waterfront, I know, because one of my men saw your handler and your handler moved toward her before the shooting started. He let that sit. You had someone watching her. Which means you knew Benedetti's people were in Harrow Cove, which means you let it get to the point of a physical grab before your man moved. Another pause. Longer. What do you want? Arcioso said. Benedetti's operation, fully documented. Whatever Vivian Cross built for you over 2 years, the complete file. And I want the VZ Street warrant stopped. Dante, in exchange. He breathed in through his nose. The salt air was coming through the slightly open window, cold and clean and indifferent. In exchange, I give you everything. Full cooperation on the Moretti organization structure. Names, accounts, operations, the complete architecture. Everything the file Vivian was building for you was trying to get to, I give it to you directly. No warrants. No trials, voluntary. The silence on the other end of the line was absolute. Not the silence of a man who had nothing to say, but the silence of a man who was very rapidly reassessing the conversation he thought he was walking into. You're offering to cooperate, RCO said carefully. I'm offering to dismantle, Dante said. There's a difference. Cooperation means you get information and I walk. That's not what I'm offering. I'm offering the organization, the entire structure. Documented, sourced, legally packaged. Whatever Vivian was building for you, I'll build it better and faster, because I know where everything actually is. And what do you want in return? Benedetti. I want his organization prosecuted, fully, specifically, using everything he's done in the last 2 years, including what he did tonight. And I want my wife and my daughter permanently out of it. Her businesses, the 11 entities in her name untouched, clean and clear. She didn't build them from criminal money. She didn't know how they were originally structured, and she is not part of any of this. That's a significant ask. It's proportional to what I'm giving you. He paused. And Arciero, you want to tell me why your man was at the waterfront tonight before I tell you why it matters to how this conversation ends? A silence. Then Vivian's handler went off script. He was supposed to be passive surveillance, only monitoring the situation to protect the integrity of the case file. When Benedetti's people moved on your wife, he made a judgment call. A judgment call that resulted in my wife being taken anyway. She was returned unharmed within 2 hours. She is 8 months pregnant, Dante said. The words came out with a force he hadn't intended, not volume but weight, the specific gravity of something that had been compressed for hours and was now finding the precise amount of space it required. 8 months pregnant, taken off a public street, held in a warehouse, and returned 2 hours later as though that constitutes an acceptable outcome. She's not a variable in your case file, Arciero. She is a person. The silence this time was different. Something in it had shifted. I'll make a call, Arciero said. I can't promise anything before morning. You have until 8 a.m., Dante said. After that, Benedetti's 24 hours starts to run, and whatever I decide tonight to do with it, you won't have input on. He paused. And tell your handler that if he's within 50 yards of my wife again, without my explicit knowledge, the judgment calls go in a different direction. He ended the call. He told Marco to find him a place to sit, a diner, a coffee shop, anywhere open. Marco found a 24-hour diner 6 blocks from the water, and Dante sat in a corner booth with coffee he didn't taste, and a phone that he watched and didn't watch, while the hours moved from 1 to 3 to 4:15. At 4:53, Arciero called back. The VC Street warrant can be delayed, he said. Not stopped. Delayed, 30 days, 60-45. Done, Dante said. Benedetti. If your documentation is as complete as you're representing, yes. Benedetti's operation is prosecutable on what we already have. What you're describing would make it airtight. It's complete, Dante said. Your wife's businesses. Already confirmed by my attorney that they're legally clean. She can have them certified by whoever you want. And you, Arcio said, what happens to you in this arrangement? Dante looked at his coffee. At the diner counter, a short order cook was starting the morning prep, moving with the slow systematic efficiency of a man who had done the same tasks in the same order for many years. Cracking eggs. Setting the grill. The ordinary machinery of an ordinary morning going on around the most consequential decision Dante had made in his adult life. I give you everything I know, Dante said. And then I walk. Not clean, I know I don't get clean. I walk. Reduced exposure, no prosecution for the dismantling process itself, and my name stays out of whatever comes after in terms of the public record. You know I can't guarantee all of that. I know you can get most of it. The rest is what it is, he paused. I'm done, Arciero. The organization is done, regardless Vivian gutted it. Benedetti hit it from the outside, and whatever's left standing is going to fall in the next 6 months, whether I cooperate or not. The only question is whether it falls on Benedetti or on me. A long pause. I'll need to bring this to my supervisor. You have until 8, Dante. You understand that once you make this call, there's no version of this where you go back. I know, Dante said. There hasn't been a back to go to since November. He hung up. He sat in the diner until 6. He drank 3 cups of coffee. He called Tommy at 5:30 and told him, in the compressed and specific language of 20 years of working together, enough of what was coming that Tommy could prepare for the rest. Tommy was silent for a long moment after he finished. Then Tommy said, "All right. Just that. All right." 6 years, and the man had the decency to give him a single word that meant, "I understand and I'll handle my side, and whatever comes next, I'm not going to make it harder than it already is." "Thank you," Dante said. He had not said those two words to Tommy in 6 years either. He arrived back at Caroline Street at 6:45. He parked a block away and walked. The blue house was quiet, lights off on the upper floor, one lamp visible through the downstairs window. He stood on the sidewalk and looked at it and breathed the morning air that was coming in off the water, cold and clean and carrying the smell of low tide. At 7:15, the front door opened. Lena came out in her coat and flat shoes, moving carefully on the uneven porch step, and she saw him immediately. He was not hiding. He was standing on the sidewalk in plain sight, because the time for positioning was over, and she came down the steps and walked toward him with the specific directness of a woman who had been awake most of the night and had made her own calculations. She stopped a few feet away. She looked at him. "You look terrible," she said. "I know. Did you sleep?" "No," she nodded. This was not concern, not yet, possibly not again. That was not determined. It was simply her being accurate about what she observed, which was what Lena had always done. "Tell me," she said. He told her. Not everything, not the Arciero call, not the full architecture of what he'd put in motion, because some of that could not be said in the open, and some of it she was better protected by not knowing in detail. But the full picture, Vivian, the 2 years, the federal informant role, Benedetti, the warehouse structure, the Vesey Street situation, the crew captains being approached. He told her what the organization actually was, not the version he had always carefully kept from her. The managed distance, the things I'm handling, but the actual structure of it, what it did and how it worked and what it had cost. She listened. She did not interrupt. Her hands were in her coat pockets, and her eyes were on his face, and she received it the way she received difficult things completely, and without flinching, processing as it came, not deferring the weight of it to some later accounting. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "What are you going to do?" she said. "I'm dismantling it," he said. "The whole organization. I made a deal last night. I give them everything. They take Benedetti. Whatever's left of my operation after that, it's over." Her expression did not change exactly, but something in it settled. "And you? What happens to you?" "I don't fully know yet. Reduced exposure. I won't be untouched." He held her gaze. "I'm not asking you for anything, Lena. I'm not telling you this because I want something from it. You said you wanted the full picture, and this is it." She looked at him for a long moment. The morning was coming up gray and cold off the water, seagulls doing their indifferent circles overhead, the town beginning its ordinary day around two people standing on a sidewalk with the entire weight of the last 4 years between them. "My daughter," Lena said, "is not going to grow up knowing what you just told me about how that organization worked." "No," he said, "she's not, and I am not." She stopped, pressed her lips together. "I am not going to spend the next 20 years waiting for the consequences of your choices to find us in whatever town we're living in." "No," he said again. "So what does that look like?" "Concretely, it looks like it's over. Completely. Not reduced, not restructured. Over." He paused. "I have money that's clean. The businesses in your name are yours. I meant that. I'm not trying to take that back. I have other assets that are clean enough to survive what's coming. What I do with my life after this." He stopped. "I don't know yet. But it's not this." Lena looked at him. Her jaw was set, and her eyes were tired, and she was the most specific person he had ever known, the most specifically, irreducibly herself, and he had built a wall of his own choices and let it stand between them until it had nearly gotten her killed on a waterfront in a town she had come to because it was 300 miles from his world. "Go handle it," she said. "Whatever you have to handle." And then she stopped. "Then we'll see." He nodded. She turned and went back toward the house. He called Arciero at 8:03. "I have a yes," Arciero said. "Conditional on your documentation being as complete as represented." "It is. We'll need to move quickly. My supervisor wants a preliminary meeting today," where Arciero gave him an address in Providence. Dante looked at the time. 2 hours. "I'll be there." He called Tommy. He gave him the specific instructions necessary to begin the documentation process, which files, which accounts, which names, which dates, the full architecture of what the organization had been and how it had functioned. Tommy received it without comment. He was writing things down. Dante could hear the pen. "Tommy," he said when the instructions were done. Yeah, whatever comes out of this, whatever your exposure is. I'll make sure it's as minimal as I can make it. A pause. I know, Tommy said. I mean it. Dante. Tommy's voice had something in it that had never been there before, something that was neither deference nor professionalism, but something more direct and harder to categorize. I know. Let's just get it done. The Providence meeting was in a federal building that Dante had never been inside before, which he was aware was a notable fact given that he had operated in the northeastern United States for 2 decades. The meeting lasted 4 hours. There were 3 people on the federal side, including Arciero, and a woman named Sayers, who ran the organized crime task force and who had the specific quality of someone who had waited a long time for a particular thing and was not going to let the satisfaction of getting it affect her professional affect. She was methodical and precise, and she pushed on every detail of his offer with the patience of someone who understood that the value of the deal was entirely dependent on the accuracy of the documentation. He was accurate. He was complete. He gave them everything. At the 2-hour mark, Sayers looked at the pages in front of her and said, without doubt looking up, the Benedetti connection to the police intelligence leak. Vivian Cross as the conduit, Dante said. The documentation trail runs from Benedetti's financial structure, through 3 shell companies to a law firm that had direct contact with OCD. Gregor can provide the full chain. Gregor, she said. A source. He'll cooperate and Cross herself. Wherever she is, she's yours. I have no interest in protecting her. He paused. I'd suggest looking at airports in the 48-hour window after she left the Midtown office. She had contingency arrangements she was too organized not to. Sayers wrote something. Looked up. Your wife's name appears in the documentation. As a legal owner of entities, yes. She's not operational. She didn't know. We'll need to confirm that. Confirm it, Dante said. You'll find what I'm telling you. At the 4-hour mark, Sayers sat back and looked at him with the expression of someone who had reached the end of a long calculation. You understand that what you're describing, the full dismantling, the cooperative disclosure, is outside the normal framework for arrangements of this kind. I know. The terms you're asking for are not standard. I know that too. Why, she said, specifically. You're giving up more than you have to. You could have come in with partial disclosure, a limited cooperation arrangement, protected significantly more of your operation and your personal exposure. Why this? Dante looked at her. He thought about the photograph in Vivian's envelope, Lena by the water, her hand on her stomach, the blue house in the background. He thought about the warehouse. He thought about a woman sitting in a chair in a cold room, holding herself together by will alone, while men stood around her who had been pointed at her by a person she had identified as a threat the first night she met her. He thought about a ring on a dresser and the sound it made. Because the cost of keeping it, he said, is higher than I can pay. Sayers looked at him for a moment longer. Then she wrote something else. By the time he drove back south from Providence, the afternoon was going gray and cold. The coast road running alongside water that was dark and choppy under a November sky that had decided to do something emphatic with the light. He drove himself. He had sent Marco back to the city in the morning, because Marco had a family in Queens, and what was coming was not something Marco should be visible in. He drove and he did not call anyone, because there was nothing left to manage by phone, and he let the road what roads do when you let them, which is give you the specific freedom of being in motion without being anywhere yet. His phone rang at 4:15, a number he had last called 7 weeks ago. He let it ring twice before he answered. Dante. His cousin Raphael calling from somewhere with background noise, a restaurant? Maybe? People and plates. Raphael was 3 years older and had stayed deliberately peripheral to the organization since their 20s, a decision Dante had always privately respected and occasionally resented. I heard some things. News travels, Dante said. Are you all right? The question landed differently than he expected. Not what happened or what are you doing, but are you all right? Which was a question about the person rather than the situation, and which no one had asked him in a very long time. Not particularly, he said. Lena? She's okay. The baby's okay. A pause. I heard it's a girl, Dante said. He had to stop for a moment. Just a second. The road went on, and the water went on, and he breathed through it. Yeah, it's a girl. What's her name? I don't know yet, he said. Lena hasn't told me. Raphael was quiet for a moment. What do you need? Nothing right now. I'm handling it. Dante. I know. He looked at the road. I'll call you when it's done. He arrived back in Harrow Cove at 6. He parked and sat in the car and called Tommy one more time. Benedetti's, he said. Already moving, Tommy said. Arcio's people made contact with OCD this afternoon. The warrants are being redirected. I'm hearing Benedetti's Midtown operation got hit an hour ago. How comprehensive. Comprehensive enough. They'll be pulling people in all night. Tommy paused. There was something else this afternoon. A woman was apprehended at Logan Airport in Boston, traveling under a Canadian passport. The photograph matches Vivian Cross. Dante closed his eyes for 1 second.
Good, yeah.
Another pause. The crew captains. 3 of them came back in when they heard what was happening with Benedetti. The other 2 a breath. They made their choices. Let them go, Dante said. Whatever they've decided, let them go. I'm not spending what's left of this fighting battles that don't matter anymore. Understood. Tommy's voice was doing the complicated thing again. Dante, for what it's worth. What you did today, the way you did it, I think your father would have... Don't, Dante said, not harshly, just directly. Don't do that tonight, Tommy. A pause. Yeah, okay, get some sleep, Dante said. Tomorrow's going to be a different kind of day. He sat in the car for a while after he hung up. The blue house was lit 2 windows downstairs, the warm yellow of a home that was being lived in by people who were not managing crises, or at least were managing them in the ordinary human way, with each other and food and the specific comfort of known spaces. He had not eaten since the diner at 4 in the morning. He became aware of this now the way you become aware of physical facts. Once the emergency has passed its peak, the body reasserting its basic requirements in the absence of adrenaline. He was tired in a way that went below physical tiredness, the specific exhaustion of someone who had been running at maximum capacity for years, and had in the last 48 hours stopped. He had no idea what stopping felt like. He was beginning to find out. He got out of the car and walked the block to the houses and knocked. Not on the front door, the side door, the one that opened to the kitchen, because the side door felt like the right kind of knock for tonight. A practical knock. A knock that did not presume. It was Caroline who answered. She looked at him. She took in whatever he looked like unshaven, not slept, still in yesterday's coat, hollow in the specific way of someone who has run out of the version of themselves they present to the world. She's in the kitchen, Caroline said. She stepped back and let him in. Lena was at the kitchen table with a cup of tea and a book she wasn't reading. It was open, but her eyes were somewhere else, somewhere middle distance, the specific unfocused look of a person processing rather than resting. She looked up when he came in. He sat down across from her without asking. His legs decided that for him. He put both hands on the table and he looked at her, and he did not say anything for a moment because he did not have the exact right words yet. And for once in his life, he was not going to use the wrong words as a substitute for the right ones. It's done, he said. Benedetti. Vivian. The organization, I gave it all up, to the federal side. Full documentation, full cooperation. She looked at him. Everything, everything. He held her gaze. There's going to be fallout. For me. I don't know exactly how much there are things in motion that take time to resolve. But the part of it that was dangerous, the part that followed you here that's done. Lena put both hands around her cup. She looked at the table for a moment. Her face was doing the thing it did when she was deciding how much to let herself feel about something before she knew whether it was safe to feel it. My daughter, she said quietly, deserves a father who made a different choice than my husband made. I know, Dante said. I don't know if those can be the same person. The words landed. He did not move. He did not defend against them because they were not an attack, they were a true thing, said with the specific ache of someone who wanted the answer to be yes and was not yet capable of knowing if it was. I don't know either, he said. I think that's something that happens over time and not in a kitchen the day after. She looked up at him. Her eyes were tired and clear and complicated and entirely hers. You look terrible, she said again. And then, after a pause that had weight in it, have you eaten? No, she stood. She moved to the refrigerator. She said without turning around, sit there. Don't talk for a minute, just sit there. He sat. Outside the kitchen window, the last of the November light was going down into the water, and the town was settling into its evening. And the sound of the ocean came through the walls of the small house with its patient and indifferent rhythm, the sound of something that had been here long before any of them and would go on long after. Dante sat at the table in the kitchen of a house that wasn't his, in a town he'd never been to, with no empire and no machinery and no performance left in him of any kind, and he breathed. And Lena set a plate in front of him without ceremony and went back to her chair and her tea and her book she wasn't reading. And the first time in longer than either of them could accurately remember, though they were simply 2 people in the same room at the same time. And the wall between them was not gone, but it was not growing. And somewhere in the room above them, a daughter, who did not yet have a name, was making her slow way toward a world that her father had, in the last 24 hours, tried to make slightly less dangerous for her to arrive in. He picked up the fork. He looked across the table at the woman who had set it down. She did not look back. She was looking at her book, but she had set the plate down, and she had said, "Sit there," and in the specific language of Lena Marlowe, those two things together meant something that was not forgiveness and was not reconciliation, but was something more immediate and more honest than either. It meant, "You are here, and I have not asked you to leave." For tonight it was the most he had any right to. He slept on Caroline's couch that night because Lena did not ask him to leave, and he did not ask permission to stay, and that was how it happened, not a decision exactly. More like the absence of a decision. The two of them too exhausted for active choices, the evening running out of energy and depositing him on that with a blanket. Caroline left folded on the armrest without comment. He did not sleep well. The couch was short, and his back made its objections clear by 2 in the morning, and he lay in the dark of the small living room and listened to the house, breathed and thought about nothing for the first time in years. Not calculating, not running patterns, just the dark and the sound of the ocean through the walls, and the knowledge that somewhere upstairs his wife was sleeping, and somewhere in the room with her his daughter was 9 days from being born into a world that was, as of this particular Tuesday, marginally less dangerous than it had been on Monday. At 5:30 he got up and made coffee because the kitchen was there, and his hands needed something to do. He found the coffee where coffee tends to live, and he made it in the small automatic machine on the counter, and he stood at the window while it brewed, and watched the early dark over the water begin to soften at its eastern edge. Caroline came downstairs at 6. She looked at him, then at the coffee, then back at him. "There's enough for 2, he said. She took a cup. She stood on the other side of the counter. The kitchen held the specific quiet of early morning in a small house, the kind of quiet that has texture to it, that is made up of small sounds: the machine, the wind off the water, the settling of old wood. "You should know," Caroline said, without preamble, in the direct way of someone who had decided this was the moment and was not going to defer it, that she cried every night the first week she was here. He held his cup. "Not in front of me." She thought I was asleep. Caroline looked at her coffee. "Lena doesn't cry easily." "You know that, I know," he said. She wasn't crying because she was weak. She was crying because she had spent 4 years loving someone who kept making her smaller, and she was finally somewhere she could take up space again. She looked up at him. "I'm not saying this to hurt you. I know that too. I'm saying it because you look like a man who thinks what happened to your organization is the main thing that happened this week. And it's not." She set her cup down. "The main thing that happened this week is that your pregnant wife was taken off a public street. And before that, the main thing was that she left. And before that, she stopped. You know what the before that is?" "Yes," he said. "I do." Caroline nodded. She picked up her cup again. "She's not going to make it easy on you. She shouldn't. And she's not going to forgive you on a schedule. I'm not asking for a schedule." Caroline looked at him for a moment with the assessing look of a woman who had known Lena Marlowe for 15 years and was running the specific calculations of whether the man in front of her was telling the truth or performing the truth. Whatever she concluded, she kept it to herself. "She likes her coffee with 1 sugar, Caroline said. "If you're here when she comes down." She took her cup and went upstairs. Dante stood at the window and watched the water turn gray, and then silver as the morning came up, and he made a second cup of coffee with 1 sugar and put it on the table and sat down to wait. Lena came downstairs at 7:40. She was in the late stages of pregnancy's specific physical wait, moving carefully, one hand briefly on the wall at the bottom of the stairs, and she came into the kitchen and saw the cup on the table and looked at it for a moment and then at him. She sat down. She picked up the cup. "How's your back?" he said. "How it always is at 8 months." She drank. Set the cup down. "Did you sleep?" "Some." She looked at him with the morning clarity that she had always had, the specific quality of Lena first thing in the morning, before the day's management had layered over it, when she was most purely herself. "What happens today?" she said. "Sal is filing papers. The asset documentation is being transferred through Miriam's office. The federal process is, it will take time. Weeks, maybe months before the full picture is settled." He paused. "But the operational piece is done. Benedetti's people were arrested yesterday afternoon. Vivian is in custody. The organization itself..." He stopped. "There's nothing left to operate. She received this. Not with relief, not with satisfaction. Just received it, added it to what she was holding. The money," she said. "What you have that's clean. Enough. Not what it was. But enough. Enough for what?" He looked at her directly. "Enough for a different kind of life. Whatever that looks like. He paused. I'm not asking you to decide what that looks like for you. I'm telling you what the landscape is. What you do with your piece of it is yours. She wrapped both hands around the coffee cup. She looked at the table. The morning light came through the kitchen window at a low angle, the November light that had no warmth but a great deal of clarity, and it laid itself across the table between them with indifferent precision. I have a meeting with Miriam next week, Lena said, about the 11 businesses, what to keep, what to restructure, what to close. She paused. I'm going to need some of them to generate income. The nonprofit I was running in the Bronx, I want to restart it. Different structure. Different city, maybe. I don't know where yet. Okay, he said. That's not a conversation with you. That's me telling you what I'm planning. I understand the difference. She looked up at him. Do you?
Yes, he said I do.
Something in her face shifted slightly, not softened, not open, but acknowledged. A small internal adjustment, the kind that doesn't show clearly on the surface, but changes what's underneath. She's due in 9 days, Lena said. I know. I want you there. She said it the way she said hard things directly, without decoration, making the statement before she could second-guess it. At the hospital. Not in the room necessarily, but there. I wondered. She stopped. Started again. I don't want her first day to be something she has to be explained about later. The weight of that landed in him somewhere specific and stayed. He held it. He did not perform a response to it, because she would see through any performance, and because the thing she had just offered him, the conditional, the one step, the door opened, the exact width of one child's first day, was not something he could respond to adequately with words. I'll buy there, he said. She nodded. She drank her coffee. Outside the window, the morning went on about its business. 8 days later, at 4:17 in the afternoon on a Thursday, Dante Moretti sat in a waiting area on the maternity floor of a hospital in Providence, Rhode Island, and he waited. He had driven up that morning when Lena's call came. Caroline's voice, actually, because Lena was past the stage of making calls herself. Calm and practical. We're heading to the hospital, she said to tell you. He had driven the 90 minutes from the city where he'd been staying at a hotel while the legal process ground through its initial phases. And he had arrived at 11:30, and he had checked in at the nurse's station and said he was the father, and they had put him in the waiting area because had specified the room, had left his name at the desk, but had kept the room, and he understood and accepted both. He sat in a plastic chair. He was still in his coat. He had a coffee from the hospital vending machine that he wasn't drinking. He sat with his elbows on his knees and his hands loosely folded, and he looked at the floor and he waited, and every so often something moved through him that he couldn't name exactly. Not fear, not prayer, not hope, more like a sustained physical awareness of the contingency of everything, the specific vulnerability of caring about an outcome you have no control over. At 6:52, Caroline came out. She looked at him. Her face had the specific expression of someone who has just witnessed something large and is still carrying it in their body. She sat down in the chair next to him, which he had not expected. She's here, Caroline said. She's fine. Lena's fine. He breathed out through his nose, one long, slow breath. 7 pounds, 2 ounces, Caroline said. She has Lena's nose in your jaw, and she is extremely opinionated about the whole situation, which honestly makes sense given the parents. He put one hand over his eyes for a moment. Just a moment. He was not a man who cried easily. He had not cried easily in 38 years, but the specific relief of those 2 sentences, she's here, Lena's fine, moved through him like something structural giving way, a pressure that had been load-bearing for 9 days releasing all at once. He lowered his hand. He looked at Caroline. The name, he said. Did she? Anna, Caroline said. Anna Marlowe Moretti. He sat with it. He said it once quietly to himself. Anna. His mother's middle name, which Lena had known. Lena, who paid attention to everything, who had spent 4 years in that house learning its history, even as he had been too occupied with its present to notice, had taken his mother's middle name and put it first. Lena chose that, he said. Yes, he looked at the floor again. He did not speak for a moment. She wants you to come in, Caroline said. I need to say this first. She's not giving you back the marriage. Not right now. She's letting you meet your daughter, and that is what it is. It's not a signal. It's not a step toward anything specific. It's just what it is. She paused. She told me to tell you that so you wouldn't read into it. I won't read into it, he said. Dante. She looked at him with the directness of 15 years of watching her best friend navigate around a person who did not make it easy. She still loves you. That's not the problem. It has never been the problem. He held her gaze. He knew. He had always known. The problem had never been love. Love had been in surplus on both sides. which was what made the damage so specific and so deep. You don't wreck something you don't care about. The wreckage was proportional to the love, and that was the part that had to be lived with. I know, he said. He stood. He put the untouched coffee in the trash. He took off his coat because the hospital was warm and because some instinct told him that arriving in a coat was arriving armored, and this was not the room for armor. He carried the coat over one arm and he walked down the hallway to the room number Caroline had given him, and he knocked. Lena's voice, "Come in." He opened the door. The room was quiet in the specific way of rooms where something enormous has just happened and the enormousness is still settling. Lena was in the bed, elevated, pale in the way of someone who has been through something physically total and has come out the other side intact. She was holding a small, wrapped thing against her chest with both arms, and she looked up when he came in with an expression he had not seen on her face before, not in 4 years, not in any configuration of their time together. It was not happiness exactly, or not only happiness. It was the specific, unguarded look of a person who has been broken open by something too large for any of the usual protections, and who is, in this one undefended moment, simply present. He stopped just inside the door. Lena looked at him. Then she looked down at the small wrapped thing. Then back at him. "Come here," she said. The same 2 words she had used when she opened the door of the Harrow Cove warehouse, the same 2 words from a different register. And he came. He sat in the chair beside the bed. Lena shifted slightly, wincing, and then she held the bundle out toward him, and his hands came up automatically, before his mind had processed the instruction, and she transferred the weight into them, and he received his daughter. Anna Marlowe Moretti was 7 pounds 2 ounces and extremely new, and she smelled like something he had no prior reference for, something that went directly to a part of him that had not been accessed before, and she had Lena's nose. And yes, Caroline was right as jaw, and she was looking at nothing in particular with the deeply concentrated expression of someone encountering existence for the first time and finding it requiring serious consideration. He sat with her. He did not speak. He had nothing to say that was adequate, and he knew it. And so he said nothing and just held her, and she made a small sound that was neither complaint nor contentment, but something in between, and he felt it move through his hands and up his arms and into his chest and settle there. Lena watched him. She did not look away. She was tired and pale, and she had given birth 6 hours ago, and she was watching her husband hold their daughter with the expression of a woman who is watching something she has wanted for a long time happen in a context she had not planned for, and does not know what to do with, which is the most honest possible position, and the only one Lena was ever capable of inhabiting for long. "She's serious," Dante said finally. His voice came out different from usual, lower and less structured. "She came out serious," Lena said. "The nurses thought something was wrong because she wasn't crying. She was just looking." "Moretti thing," he said. Lena made a sound that was almost not quite, but almost a laugh. It faded quickly, but it had been there, and they both knew it had been there. He held Anna for 20 minutes. Then he gave her back, carefully, with the specific care of a man returning something irreplaceable, and he sat back in the chair and looked at Lena, and she looked at him, and neither of them said what the room was full of. "Get some sleep," he said finally. "I'll be outside." She nodded. She pulled Anna in closer. Her eyes were already going heavy. "Dante," he stood. "Thank you," she said, "for the Harrow Cove thing, for coming." He looked at her. "There was never a version where I didn't." She held his gaze for a moment. Then she closed her eyes. He went back to the waiting room and sat in the plastic chair with his coat in his lap, and he stayed there until the hospital went quiet around midnight. And then he went to his hotel and he slept for 10 hours without waking. The legal process took 4 months to reach its primary resolution. Benedetti was indicted on 37 counts across 3 jurisdictions. The trial date was set 14 months out, but the evidence was, as Sayers had implied, it would be comprehensive enough that the practical question of outcome was not a question. Vivian Cross entered a negotiated plea in February, which Dante learned about from Sal and which he received with a feeling he could not accurately describe as satisfaction, and did not try to. Gerald Fitch was located in Tampa, Florida in January, living under a name that had required more creative effort than his skill set justified. The money he had taken was partially recoverable. Dante did not pursue the unrecoverable portion, which surprised Sal and did not surprise Tommy. Tommy himself was given a reduced arrangement through Dante's cooperation limited exposure, no prosecution on the organizational charges, a fine that was significant and manageable. He left New York in March and moved to a place in western Pennsylvania where his wife's family was from. And Dante received one text from him in April, "Garden's coming in. Kids are fine." "You all right?" he responded, getting there. Tommy did not write again, and Dante did not expect him to, and the silence between them had the quality of something completed rather than abandoned. The Blackthorn estate sold in February. Dante had not been back inside it since the night of the ring on the dresser. He had the contents transferred to storage, the garden documented by a photographer at the last minute for reasons he could not fully articulate, and then he signed what needed to be signed, and it was someone else's house. He moved to a rented apartment in Providence, which put him 40 minutes from Harrow Cove. He did not move to Harrow Cove. Lena had not asked him to, and he had not asked if he should. He was 40 minutes away, which was available without being present. And available without being present was what Lena had space for. And he was learning slowly, with the specific difficulty of a man who had spent 20 years constructing elaborate mechanisms for control and was now learning to operate without them, to take what was offered and not push for more. He saw Anna twice a week, Wednesday afternoons and Sunday mornings, arranged through Lena in the practical coordinating language that had replaced the language of their marriage in the short term. He drove to Harrow Cove, and he sat in Caroline's living room, or sometimes, when the weather allowed, in the small yard behind the house, and he held his daughter and talked to her about things that didn't matter, and some that did, and she looked at him with her serious Moretti look, and made her sounds and grew. Lena was present for these visits. Not warm, not cold, something more specific and harder to sustain, which was honest. She was honest with him in the way you are, with someone whose capacity for honesty you are still in the process of evaluating, which is the only truly fair way to be honest with someone who has broken your trust. She answered questions. She asked practical ones. She told him when Anna had a cold, when she slept through the night for the first time, when she smiled, actually smiled, not the reflex ones for the first time, which happened on a Wednesday afternoon when Dante was making a face he had not made since he was approximately 12 years old. And Anna looked at him, and something in her face cracked open into the most unambiguous thing he had ever seen. He was 38 years old, and his daughter smiled at him for the first time, and he sat there in Caroline's living room with the late afternoon light coming through the window and felt something through him that he had no prior calibration. For something that made the 20 years of empire and reputation and accumulated consequence feel like a very long way to travel to arrive at a Wednesday afternoon in a small house by the ocean. Lena, from the kitchen doorway, had seen it. She had turned away before he looked up, but he had seen her turn, and he had seen the angle of her shoulders, and he understood that she was managing something too. In March, 4 months after Harrow Cove, Lena drove to Providence. She had not been to his apartment. He had not suggested it, and she had not offered, and they had kept the geography separate in the mutual unspoken understanding that the geography meant something about the stage they were in. When she called to say she was coming, he stood in his kitchen and looked at the window and said, carefully, "Okay, I'll be here." She arrived at 1 in the afternoon. She came upstairs. She stood in the doorway of his apartment and looked at it, small, clean, spare, the apartment of a man who had shed everything and was living in the aftermath of that shedding, with 2 good chairs and books he was actually reading, and a kitchen that was used, and a window that looked at nothing more significant than a Providence street. She came inside. She sat in one of the 2 chairs. He sat in the other, and they were facing each other across a small table, and he waited. "Miriam finished the restructuring," she said. "The 11 businesses. I'm keeping 7, closing 3, and 1 I'm converting into the foundation structure for the nonprofit." She paused. "The one I'm keeping as the primary income source, the commercial real estate holdings in Connecticut, generates is enough to support the nonprofit and cover the household." "Good," he said. "I'm not staying in Harrow Cove," she said. "Caroline has been generous, but it's her house, and I've been there long enough."
She looked at him directly.
"I'm looking at a place in Westerly, Rhode Island. It's small, near the water. There's a school district that's decent." She paused. "It's 14 minutes from Providence." He held her gaze. He understood exactly what she was telling him and exactly what she was not telling him. And the distance between those 2 things was the distance they currently occupied. And it was real, and it was the right distance for where they were. "Westerly is a good town," he said. "I know," she said. "I looked at it because it's 40 minutes from you." She said it flatly, without decoration. Lena stating a fact that was also something more than a fact. This isn't me saying things are resolved. They're not resolved. I don't know if they're going to be resolved in the way you might want them to be. And I'm not going to tell you they are when I don't know. I know, he said. But she needs her father accessible, Lena said. And I have been watching you for 4 months, and I have not seen you be who you were. I have seen you be. She stopped. She looked at her hands. Different. And I don't know if different is enough, and I don't know if it lasts. Because I have known you for 5 years, and I know how you go back to what you know how to be when the pressure eases. She looked up. So this is me saying 40 minutes. And we see, he repeated. That's all I've got right now. It's more than I had a right to expect, he said. She looked at him. Something moved across her face, not warmth, not yet, but the beginning of the thing that comes before warmth, the tentative recognition of someone who has been through something enormous with another person and is beginning to consider whether that shared enormous thing constitutes a foundation or only a shared wound. She stayed for 2 hours. They talked about Anna, her sounds, her sleeping, the specific way she had of examining her own hands, as if they represented a fascinating new development. They talked about Lena's plans for the nonprofit, which she was restarting under a new name, boards she was building from scratch, people she trusted, rather than people who came with the landscape. He told her about the course he had enrolled in business law, night classes at a Providence college, something he had done without announcement, and which clearly surprised her. Business law, she said. I have certain practical expertise, he said carefully, in how people structure things to avoid accountability. I thought I might redirect that. She looked at him for a moment. Then she said, consulting. Eventually. I don't know yet, he paused. I'm not in a hurry. I have time. You've never not been in a hurry, she said. I know, he said. It's uncomfortable. That sound came from her again, the almost law. This time it lasted slightly longer before it faded. When she stood to leave, she stood in the doorway for a moment, the way she had stood in the doorway of the Blackthorn estate, the night she had set the ring on the dresser the same doorway position, same quality of a woman at a threshold making a decision about which direction to go. But this time she was not leaving from something. She was standing in the middle of it, in the exact center of an unresolved thing, and she was deciding what to do with the fact that the unresolved thing was still living in her body alongside the hurt of it. The anniversary of the night I left, she said. It's in 2 weeks. November 14th, he said. You know the date. I know every date from that period, he said. I have a lot of time to think now. She was quiet for a moment. Then Anna's going to be walking soon. She's already pulling up on things. A pause. I want you to see that. When it happens. I'll be there, he said. She nodded. She went. He stood at the window and watched her car pull out from the street below, and he watched it till it turned the corner and was gone. And then he stayed at the window a while longer, because the view was nothing remarkable, but it was his, and he was learning to find something in the unremarkable that he had spent 20 years overlooking. 2 years later, Dante sat on the back steps of a house in Westerly, Rhode Island on a Saturday afternoon in September, with a cup of coffee going cold in his hand, and his daughter at the end of the small yard, examining a beetle with the focused seriousness of a 2-year-old encountering the world's details, which required full physical commitment crouched over, nose nearly to the ground, one hand on the grass for balance. The door behind him opened. Lena came out with her own coffee and sat on the step beside him. Not close. The specific distance they had been calibrating for 2 years, which had been getting gradually smaller in the way that real things change, but not in declared moments, but in accumulated, ordinary ones, the kind that don't announce themselves. They watched Anna examine the beetle. She's going to try to bring it inside, Lena said. I know. Last time, the sock drawer, he said. I know. Lena made the sound that was no longer almost a laugh, but had become an actual one, quiet and specific and entirely hers. He had been collecting those laughs for 2 years, the way some people collect evidence of something they need to confirm is real. Anna looked up from the beetle and saw them both on the steps, and her face did the thing it did, the smile that started in her eyes, and arrived at her mouth half a second later, unhurried, the most honest expression Dante had encountered in 38 years of reading rooms, and she said, clearly and with great conviction, "Bug." "We see the bug," Lena said. "Big bug," Anna clarified. "Very big," Dante agreed. Anna looked at the beetle again. She was apparently satisfied with the confirmation and returned to her investigation. Lena drank her coffee. Dante held his cold cup and did not drink it, and felt the September afternoon on his face, the light that was losing its summer intensity without yet having found its fall harshness, the specific quality of a season in transition. "Miriam called yesterday," Lena said. "The Connecticut property?" "She found a buyer. A good one." Pause. "It's the last one I'm liquidating. The foundation is fully self-sustaining now." "Good," he said. And he meant it completely. Her independence was not a threat to him the way it might once have been when he had understood strength as something you consolidated rather than something you stood next to. She was quiet for a moment. Then the Benedetti verdict comes down next month. I know. How do you feel about that? He thought about it honestly. Like it happened a long time ago, he said. Like it belongs to a version of things that doesn't have much to do with this. He looked at the yard, at Anna, at the beetle that was apparently attempting to move on with its life while a 2-year-old reconsidered the situation. I don't feel vindicated. I don't feel relieved. I just feel like it's the last piece of paperwork on something I've already closed. Lena absorbed this. She had a way of receiving what he said that had changed over 2 years, less guarded, less checking for the angle, more simply listening and deciding what to do with it. He had earned that change, incrementally through 2 years of not reverting, of not reaching for the old patterns when the pressure eased, of discovering that the old patterns had been a structure built on fear of exactly what he now had, an ordinary September Saturday, a yard, a daughter with a beetle, a woman on a step beside him who had not given him back the marriage, but had given him something he was only beginning to understand was worth more. A different kind of trust. Harder to build, harder to break. Built from the actual facts of how he showed up, not the story he told about himself. I looked at the apartment listings in Westerly, he said. There's a place on Elm. 2 blocks from here. She looked at him. I'm not asking, he said. I'm telling you I'm looking. Because Anna's starting to ask why Daddy doesn't stay. And he stopped. I want to be closer. I want to be 2 blocks instead of 40 minutes. But I'm not asking you for more than that. The 2 blocks. Lena held her cup in both hands and looked at the yard where their daughter had now apparently made peace with the beetle and was moving on to assess the fence. She was quiet long enough that he stopped waiting for her to speak and let the quiet be what it was. The place on Elm, she said finally. Is it the white one or the gray one? Gray. The gray one has a good yard. She paused. Anna could walk there from here. That's what I thought, he said. Lena drank her coffee. She didn't say yes. She didn't say anything further on the subject, which, in the specific language of the last 2 years, was its own kind of answer, not an opening of the door, but a hand on the handle, testing whether it was the kind that moved. Anna had reached the fence and was examining it with the same forensic commitment she had brought to the beetle. She turned and looked back at them on the steps, checking, the way small children check, making sure the fixed points were still in place. Mama, she said, then Zara. Both of them. Named in sequence, with the matter-of-fact satisfaction of someone confirming inventory. Right here, Lena said. Here, Dante said. Anna turned back to the fence, confirmed content. The afternoon light fell across the small yard, and the 2 people on the back steps and the child at the fence. And none of them were who they had been, and the damage that had been done had not been undone, because damage is not a thing that undoes. It is a thing that becomes part of the structure, worked around and through and into until it is no longer only damage, but also the record of what survived it. The Moretti name would appear in the press one more time the following month when the verdict came down, and then it would appear nowhere, which was exactly what Dante had negotiated and exactly what he wanted. His daughter would grow up with that name, and it would mean nothing except what they made it mean in the accumulation of ordinary days, the beetle in the yard, the step in September, the 40-minute drive that was becoming 2 blocks. The coffee that went cold while you watched your kid examine the world and found, to your own surprise, that you had no desire to be anywhere else. He had lost everything he once believed made him powerful. It had taken him until this particular Saturday in September to understand that the loss had not been the end of something. It had been the beginning of the only life he'd ever actually wanted, and been too afraid of his own need to reach for directly. Anna abandoned the fence. She came back across the yard toward the steps with the focused, purposeful gait of a toddler with a destination, and she climbed the single step with the effort it required, and she wedged herself into the space between them, compact and certain, and she looked from one face to the other with her serious eyes. And then she sat down and leaned back and settled into the afternoon like she owned it. Because she did. Lena's hand moved, small and unremarked, and came to rest on Dante's arm. Not a declaration. Not a signal. Just her hand, warm and specific, resting there for a moment in the September light before she reached for her coffee again. He looked at the yard. He breathed the salt air. He let it be exactly what it was. It was enough. It was... He understood now what enough had always looked like. He had simply 20 years building walls too high to see it from where he was standing.